Hello. Can everyone hear me okay? Is the volume good? You got a thumbs up? Hard to see y'all. Hi everyone, I'm Emma Saperstein. I'm the Chief Curator at the San Luis Obispo Museum of Art. Thanks so much for spending your Saturday morning with us. I love doing our talks at the Palm because I get popcorn for breakfast. I don't know if anybody else, this is your first meal of the day. So like in a hurry getting out the door this morning, I was like, it's okay, I can eat breakfast at the Palm. Buttered popcorn. We're so thrilled that Anila is here and is willing to share a little bit more about her practice with us. Saw many of you last night at her opening of Liminal Space at the museum. That's up until November. And so if you haven't seen the show yet, I encourage you to stop by. The museum is open to the public Thursday through Monday from 11 to 5. We have a beautiful front desk staff who will tell you anything you need to know and answer all your questions. There's actually several incredible exhibitions at the museum right now, so I encourage you to go spend an hour and half an hour and get to know our space. I'm going to thank our sponsors who make everything that we do possible, the installations, our artists travel, everything is as thanks to our generous sponsors, including for Anila's show, it's Pac West, Cal Poly, Hotel SLO, KSBY, of course the City of SLO, and Nate's on Marsh, who hosted a beautiful dinner for us the other night to celebrate Anila's work. I'm not gonna share a formal bio because I got a sneak peek of Anila's slides where she will share so much about her history and her practice. This is the third time that Anila is engaging with our community. She came first in 2016 to the Miosi Gallery at Cuesta College when I was the curator there, which was fabulous. She has a public art project that's in the city's collection, and now she is back for a third time. So it really feels like welcoming a friend back to our community. All of y'all have the great privilege of getting to know her as a person and getting to know her work as an artist. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Anila, and bear with us. I think we have the slides figured out, but you're a generous crowd.
Do I need to use this? Or was this gonna work?
No, that's just for the recording.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. I'm gonna sort of like read the presentation. Usually I stand on a podium and do it that way, but this is my first time at a movie theater. So it's kind of interesting. I wanted to tell you guys that I have so far spent about maybe almost 3 weeks in California this summer. And it has been fabulous because I'm at an artist residency titled Lucas Artist Residency in Montalvo. And I have truly fallen in love with the redwood trees. I think that they are just the most amazing living creatures on the planet so far, other than the mangroves. You know, those are also wonderful. So this is my 24th year in the United States. Almost half of my life has been spent here. And I have traveled between Virginia, Texas, Indiana, Georgia. Mostly I've lived in red states. And then sometimes there's a tiny window to have a little bit of fun. This was last summer. We went ziplining as well as we went down the rapids. And they were pretty hard and tough, but I kind of think I'm like the chicken who crossed the road. So it was fun. I think the second time that we did it this summer, I was more scared of the zip lining than I was the first time. Go figure. So a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Pakistan. And I was born during really turbulent political times. It was a newly formed country with very ancient roots, but the geographical borders were newly formed. If you don't know, Britain had colonized the subcontinent, which was comprised of the country called Hindustan, which translated into English, India. And then once the British left, it was subdivided into 5 countries. And you can imagine the kind of havoc that created. It was based on religious dogma that was separation was created, and the British decided to sort of leave us in the lurch, and 3 or maybe more than 3 million people crossed borders to go on either side, which was probably the largest migration of people to date in those days. And it was around the same time as the Second World War, so around the Second World War, I think, or right after. And so it was a pretty bad time. So considering that Pakistan became a new country, it decided to reform itself and make a do-over. And colonization, of course, leaves a lot of problems behind, as we are all aware. What happened with Pakistan was that because it needed a new identity, it started negating its shared history with India and Bangladesh and other places, and tried to create alliances with the Arab nations. But we didn't really have much in common, other than the religious dogma that exists between Islam, you know. Pakistani people are actually really gregarious, funny, love dancing, song, you know, they do a lot of parties. But as soon as we became separate, it became like a place that wanted to kind of get rid of all of the, you know, song and dance, and we became very congested. And so I grew up during that time, which started the whole thing to become really conservative. And due to the cultural disapproval, my family was really worried for me to join a co-ed college that was an art school. But in spite of cultural disapproval, I decided to do it. So I was even then the chicken who crossed the road. And I think I must have been 15 at the time when I started, or 16 when I enrolled in the college. My years at the college were, it's called the National College of Arts. It was the only art school in Lahore, Pakistan at the time, in the entire country. And they would select about 200 students per year. And so I spent some really lovely time with a lot of my professors who were feminists, and we would go on these protest marches to kind of protest against the Hudud Ordinance, which was one of the laws that were you know, kind of created that criminalized non-marital sex, including rape, and led to thousands of women being imprisoned. And this was my formative years in Pakistan, in Lahore, which kind of also included the honor crimes. So if a woman was raped, she had, the law specifically deals with a woman's testimony as being half of that of man's. So if a woman is raped, she has to have a witness who will admit to that rape there. And it's still, now it makes me think of, you know, the curtailment of the abortion laws here, kind of makes me think of how difficult it's going to become for women in this country as well. So it's sort of like similar in that respect. And Pakistan has, you know, like recently you may have read stories about Iranian women being beaten and put in jail and stuff. So that was happening around the time that I was growing up there. So in my late 20s, I moved to the US, and I realized how much there were similarities between my being here and being discriminated against, as well as my being in Pakistan, being discriminated as a woman. And so both of those things kind of generated a desire in me to explain my cultural beginnings, but also my identity. And it started forming into this feminist person who you see today, who makes work about healing spaces. So this particular piece is, oh, go back, Emma. Sorry. This particular piece is about commerce and trade that opens up cultures between the East and the West. And in recent times, a journalist, when I opened the show in Kew Gardens, I was asked by a journalist over there she kind of put this question, isn't appropriation akin to admiration? And I said, like, if you're on equal footing, yeah. But colonized places are never on equal footing. So how can that be admiration? It's more like stealing. And in this particular work, what I've done is I've inserted some elements that were designed by William Morris, who had actually appropriated Islamic art and architecture in his work. And he was very, very popular during the arts and crafts movement in Britain and in Europe, right after Bauhaus, I believe. And so you can spot it in there, but what I wanted to talk about with this particular piece was that first, it's similar to the piece that you're going to see in the museum here in SLOMA. It's sort of like reflects your image onto you. And so we can see that we are inextricably linked with nature, and we cannot face the other way when so much havoc is being created. So this work is about trade, commerce, the use of resources from colonized places, and then leaving them to fend for themselves after all the wealth has been removed. And it also reflects yourself onto the piece, and it reflects on you as well. So I think this was probably one of the hardest pieces I've ever built because it has 5 layers. And to install it, I need at least 2 to 3 days. And it took about 1.5 years to build, which was difficult. Okay, we can move on. According to scientists, the planet's warming and climate change will continue its destruction. And most of the global south is going to be affected by it. And we're going to have a lot of climate change refugees coming onto our doorsteps. And because I'm a self-decided displaced person, because I decided to immigrate because I was born in Pakistan, so I wanted more challenges. You know, if only I'd known what I would face here at the time. But I feel very closely to people who are moving around the world. I'm also the champion for the victims often because I will take their side. But nobody is going to be really safe, in my opinion, or according to the scientific knowledge that we have currently, like the fires in California and Canada now affected New York City, and people are becoming really aware of how this is going to affect us in the future. The sad thing is that we are almost not making much change in the way we conduct ourselves. And so I feel like this particular piece is very floral. It's also reflective, and you will see this in the SLOMA. This one is actually black, and this was shown at the Amon Carter Museum in Fort Worth, Texas. Actually, they commissioned me to build this piece, and then I made another in silver, which is what Emma chose to show here. And again, it shows you your own reflection. But I'm also very interested in the shadows that fall behind it. In a sense, this is also a homage to Robert Irwin, who was a California artist who did a lot of work that has helped me move forward, because we build on the shoulders of other giants as artists. So I always owe it to people who helped me move forward. And this kind of piece talks about how the global north is going to have to contend with a lot of refugees coming here or to Europe. What are we going to do? Let them die? Which we do sometimes. Or leave them on the border where they are persecuted. I think we need to kind of figure out how we're going to deal with this, because it's everybody's responsibility to take care of the Earth, I believe. This piece is called Flight of 1,000 Birds. This is specifically dealing with future and current migrations of people and animals, appropriation, colonization, commerce, and our breakneck speed in using up the resources of the Earth. It's also one of the tiles I found at the Alhambra. The outer boomerang shape that you see is actually a tile I found, and I decided to change it. So some people asked me last night if I am interested in M.C. Escher's work. And I am, because he kind of did the tessellation that other people learned from as well. So again, a homage to him, but also to the migrants who do so much for our country, our survival, Next. So there's a passage in this book that I'm very fond of, The Invisible Dragon, Essays on Beauty by Dave Hickey. And he writes, and I'm going to read this quote, "Beauty is not a thing. The beautiful is a thing. In images, beauty is the agency that causes visual pleasure in the beholder. And since pleasure is the true occasion for looking at anything, any theory of images that is not grounded in the pleasure of the beholder begs the question of art's efficacy and dooms itself to inconsequence." I make very beautiful work. I'm very interested in the crafting of it. I'm very interested in keeping it clean, and geometry has to be exact. When I use organic materials, I still kind of create a sense of order. There's chaos and order simultaneously being utilized within the work. So this paragraph gave me the desire to create beautiful art. It may also have been due to the brutal critiques I used to receive in grad school. Often the comments were like, women's work is really banal, because if you make it too beautiful, it's kind of boring. And so around the time when I was going to grad school, it occurred to me that I'm often encouraged to make work in a Euro-Western way. Often I was told to look at people such as Jackson Pollock, or, I don't know, a lot of people that made work that was very manly, very, sort of like, ooh. And I am like more attracted to work that is poetic. I want to, somebody once asked me, what kind of work would you describe your work as in one word? And I said, poetic. That's what I am attracted to. So I just am attracted to also old places, old environments, beautiful Roman structures, the Alhambra. I am passionate about the old and the new. And so it helps me to kind of patch together a collage of pattern that I find in different places, in different buildings and textiles, and I'll kind of combine them in a collage way. So a pattern like this on this particular piece, which is called A Beautiful Despair, is not immediately, you may feel like it's familiar, maybe if you've traveled to the East, but you may not find it anywhere in complete section in any one place, because I've taken fragments from different places and put them together. And then I changed them a little bit to kind of fit my own paradigm, sort of like my combination of being half from the East and half from the West now. And so one time I was in I think it was Cordoba, and I was standing on the bridge that the Romans had built in the 3rd century, and the water was going underneath. And I felt like I could hear the vibrations of the centuries passing under me. And it's a very visceral reaction that I had. I was so interested in thinking about the layers that we as human beings have lived through centuries. You know, I mean, like we may have 70 years on the earth as individuals, but the human history is very long. And we have done some really great things and also some really bad things. And so I feel, the vibrations through these old places, and they help me create the layers in the work. Over the years, my work has become very abstract. And abstract art, in my opinion, is extremely difficult to make, especially if you want to convey meaning through it. And so I use the shadows as metaphors for meaning or comprehension or education. The light is to reflect literacy, the idea of enlightenment. And this particular piece was built during the pandemic. And the reason why I titled it A Beautiful Despair was that it was a combination of feeling real despair, but it was also really beautiful because the bees came back and the birds started chirping again. And everybody came to a standstill, the planes stopped flying, and our lives became stationary, sort of still. And we started listening to what the nature was telling us. And I felt like it was an extreme sense of loss because we lost community of people, but then the animals started. I mean, I have a possum who comes to visit me in my home in the garden, and they are great. They're great for the environment, actually. So this is the same piece that you have here, but it's in white. This one was in black, and I painted the walls black as well. I start with familiar motifs that are familiar to me, that I have photographed, and then in due course they become reinterpretations of the original designs as collages. And I am interested in infusing each work with a contemplative focus suggestive of the underlying order of both the cosmos and the natural world through their symmetries. I am interested in projects that explore contradictions, light and shadow, heavy and light, beautiful and ugly, color, dark, and and this piece is so heavy, but it looks really light. And I'm very interested in the metaphor or the meaning that that can convey, because what it does is it allows you to see the contradictions that human beings live with on a constant basis, male and female, life and death. Somebody's being born and somebody's dying. And so those types of contradictions are integral to our lives. And I want my work to kind of reflect that strength that humans display, but also create these healing spaces that will allow people to come in and talk to each other, feel like they belong. And some of this work may be familiar to you because it reflects the Moorish or the Islamic influences. And a lot of people have asked me in the past if I'm trying to convert people, and it's like, no. I'm not religious, but I do find spirituality in nature. And so I think my answer often is that I have to start from where I began. I was born in Pakistan, I'm going to go back to it, start from there, build from there, and then convert it to where I am now. And so it's a combination of the Eastern and the Western influence on my person as an artist, on my psyche. And the one thing that I do want to mention is that I am very interested in the dichotomy of race and gender and creed that the USA is so obsessed with. You know, like I don't think I realized I was an alien until 9/11 happened. And then I immediately became visible that I was from the Middle East, and you know, even that was wrong. So it was like, come on, at least, you know, figure out your knowledge better. Anyway, so in recent times, I've read some really hard books. You know, Ain't I a Woman? I wonder if people have read that book. It's really lovely. White Fragility is another book that came out some 2-3 years ago. And then my favorite book by a friend, Against White Feminism, which is amazing. They're all very critical of our current paradigm. But so much becomes apparent that, you know, you start thinking, okay, there's a different point of view. You know, like history is often written by the victors. So if you can change your perspective, you can also try to understand other people's perspective who may not be the people at the top. And so it has kind of, and you know, I spend a lot of time in the studio. So I listened to Audible. I discovered it about 6-7 years ago, and my life changed. So I listen to books and podcasts in the studio while I'm working. And there's another book that I recently read. It's called Strong Men, and the writer is Ruth Ben-Ghiat. And it's about autocracy and why authoritarian, you know, leaders take over and try to change the political paradigm of any free country. And it starts from, you know, Italy, and comes all the way through from Afghanistan to, you know, to Israel, to here, to, you know, Erdogan, who's Turkish, and it deals with all the leaders who have really shown authoritarian tendencies. And it makes me wonder why we let that happen to us every time. It's happened in Pakistan, it's currently happening in India, in Turkey, in Europe. So I'm just so concerned about the politics because it ultimately impacts people on the ground more than it impacts the leaders. And so drawing all of those contradictions through my work can be helpful to me. This is titled Rites of Passage. And this I built a long time ago. There are 100 pieces, and it was reflective of this place that's a World Heritage Site based in Pakistan in the Sindh province. And there was this huge graveyard. It's kind of like spaced out over a couple of miles. And it's got these beautifully carved sandstone graves. And the taller graves were all with symbols for men, like scimitars and swords and, you know, like shields. And the women's graves were short, and they had jewelry on it, or fabric, or textiles carved on it. And so this is sort of like a homage to the rights of women, in my opinion. Next. In recent times, I've noticed that there are a lot of artists who are using textiles. And you know, I started using textiles 23 years ago, and processes that were connected to textiles. And this work is similar to one of the works that you have in the show, Emma, here. It's a sister piece to that piece. But if you notice the dots on it, they are all beads. And I stitched the beads after I drew the drawing with graphite and Conte crayon. And I just think that, you know, in the last 20 years, like I've seen recently Bisa Butler, who's making these quilts, and they're being shown in all these amazing museums now, and people are collecting them. But when I started, people used to laugh at what I wanted to do with my work. And so it kind of makes me feel proud that I continue to stick to it. and continue to work. I don't use fabric per se, but I use a lot of the processes that are connected to textiles, and pattern, of course, is one of the things, and then I use beading to depict light on the flat work. It's sort of a way to show the hand, but also to reflect the stories, the untold stories of women. Because when I was younger, my mother used to have a sewing circle, and I learned to sew very, very early on. And much of the work that I do in the flat work, I want to explore gender-based discrimination and issues that result from that, often made by history and past and present lives, and how we value people and how we undervalue certain people who may not fit our own idea of what the world should be. So this work is sort of like talking about the complexity of shadows, so the metaphor of comprehension, but also the undervaluation of women. In the drawings I use, you can move on. So in these two works, there's translucency, the materials are translucent. I used wax, I used rubbings, I used, this particular piece is owned now by the Amon Carter Museum in Fort Worth. And this is probably one of my favorite works, and I wish I'd kept it for myself, because I recently found out that people such as Leonardo Drew and Kehinde Wiley, some really important artists of current times, they keep the best work for themselves for their old age. So they can sell it to buy healthcare maybe later. And since we are never going to get free healthcare here, that may be necessary. So it's a way to kind of show how our lives are entwined, how we kind of, the history, the current situation, women's lives, the value is kind of entwined within the work. And the sewing is a way to tell the stories of women in a very silent, quiet manner. And so the drawings are kind of quiet. You have to be up close and personal to see them and understand what they're doing, whereas the installations are sort of like expansive and immersive, so you can be part of the environment. And it's my way to use the embroidery to kind of show as a drawing media, as a drawing medium to show the line, the curve, the skills that I may have that will show you how I get to the point of making something. It's a way to draw people in, to make people realize that there's more to see. And then, of course, the shadows within the work can also be very enticing. That particular piece is all cut out, and it sits in a shadow box. So there's reflected light that falls behind on the paper behind it, and it casts shadows. So there it becomes doubly dense. The density becomes quite strong. Much of my work is very labor intensive, as you've noticed. And I use materials that can conceal and reveal. Some of the items that you saw in the exhibition, or you will see, you will notice that I use materials that can obscure or reveal quite effectively, and shadows add another dimension to it. I do believe in building community. I believe in being very authentic. People that I love and include in my life, like Emma and Leanne, become lifelong friends, that we can help each other, build community. And I feel really strongly about San Luis Obispo, because this is the third time I've been invited back. And those types of things don't happen very often, because once I've done something, I'm in a sea of strangers, I move on to the next thing. but to be invited back is really extraordinary, and I thank Emma for that, because she liked me enough that she brought me back. My mother used to have sewing circles, as I mentioned, and so she would have these women come around in the fall of every year, and she would have, and I was very young, so I would sit under the quilt that they were sewing, hand sewing, and there were usually about 8 or 10 women sitting there talking about their lives. And so I think that kind of stayed in my mind about how to build community, how to kind of introduce people to authentic selves. And often these women would talk about their lives. They weren't all rich or wealthy people. They were like, neighborhood ladies who would come over. Some got paid, some didn't want to get paid. But it was a way to share their lives and talk about education or lack of it, health care in Pakistan. And so I think that stayed with me for the longest time, which is what I try to do with my work, to kind of create that community and bring people in. Okay. So this also kind of reflects that. So we can move on. So my large-scale sculptural installations create universally welcoming environments through the interplay of light and shadow, while the works on paper kind of reveal or create intimacy and the presence of the feminine. I use my own experience as a woman of color. My artwork reaches beyond personal to explore cultural binaries such as light and dark, masculine and feminine, public and private. I also wanted to mention, like, growing up in a country like Pakistan, which had amnesia about its history, many early experiences of exclusion led to my gender being excluded, often from public spaces. I remember I became very androgynous when I was young. That's why I still wear my hair really short. It's also because I'm losing hair, but but it was a way to kind of deal with the idea of how I could move around the public space in Pakistan without being harassed. And so, and here, of course, I had to fit in, so I became sort of like, I dress very American, I think, to make sure that people don't target me. And of course, right now I'm living in Augusta, Georgia, and I kind of feel a little, but it's getting better. It's become purple, so hopefully it'll be better. I think despite power and inequities, home is a familiar place, and the feelings of inclusivity, intimacy is what I try to strive with my work. This particular piece is actually titled the first one. This is not a refuge. It kind of deals with the idea of refugees who came to our southern borders. And I built this piece in 2018 for a Biennale in Kansas City. And the idea was, at the time, President Trump was saying some really difficult things for especially people such as me who are immigrants and have only done good for this country. I'm taught for the last 20 years in this country, and I've educated thousands of young people. And so it kind of made me feel really sad at hearing him say some really difficult things to stomach. And at the same time, I was asked to make a project for this Biennale, and I was looking at the cages that children were being put into on the southern border. And around the same time, I kind of thought about what it means to be an American and how most everybody is an immigrant in this country. And when I was living abroad, I used to look towards America thinking that it was a land of educated, free people. And so I built this piece with a doorway. It deals with the idea of agency, yet it's also a mirage. Like when you look at America now from the outside, or at the time when I was building this, I was thinking of how the concept of America may have become tarnished, and we may need to fix that image to show, again, the inclusivity, the freedom, the sense of harmony that can exist amongst people. And this piece sort of is, it has a chair, a stool inside, so you can sit inside and the sun travels through it or over it, so it casts shadows around. It's got a light bulb for the night, so this piece actually sat in front of the Kansas City Art Institute, and so the students would go in at night and sit inside. It also has an audio that I had designed and produced, because it tells the stories of immigrants who have come to the United States. So there are about 10 or 12 people who are telling their stories, sharing what happened with them, and you can actually find it on my website if you are interested in listening to it. It starts with how they came to America, so it's sort of like excitement, then a little, dips a little, and then it goes back up. So it's a high and low kind of audio that talks about people's experiences of being in America. It's also kind of funny in some places, which is really lovely. Moving on. Am I out of order? Okay. So we can move on. Some of this work is, I wanted to talk about the intersection piece, if we've crossed it. Maybe go back. Yeah, this one, that one. This particular piece was the first one of my larger sculptures. This was the first time I built a sculpture that was really huge and weighed a lot. And this was truly inspired by the Alhambra in Granada in southern Spain that I visited many years ago. And I was struck by some things that were really lovely, because Alhambra could be considered the jewel that was created to reflect the East and the West in a really lovely country in the hillside, depicting a combination of people from 3 different religious people who came together to build this beautiful jewel, this architectural wonder. And for me, it was really a moment to realize that when we work together, we can work so well. And so this piece was when I visited, I was also hungry, so I may have been slightly lightheaded. And so I kind of assumed, and I'm not kidding, honestly, people were quiet. There were thousands of people. It was a time ticket, so you had to walk through it. You couldn't stop for long periods of time. You had to walk within that time slot. And I'm not kidding, it was quiet as could be. And there were people from all parts of the world, and it felt like it was a place that belonged to everybody. And I would see the look on people's faces, and I was like struck by how amazing that experience was. And I thought to myself, I'm going to do this when I get back home. I'm going to build something that will reflect this sense of awe that one can feel. And so when I got back to Indiana, I wrote a grant, and the University of Indiana, Indiana University gave me a bunch of money that I was able to build this. Now, when I was building this, the idea wasn't a cube. It was more like a sort of like a roof over our heads with 3 layers and the light being on top. And so it was more like the idea of like light filtering through the redwoods, so to speak. But the money wasn't enough, and I remember Steve and I, who's my partner, and he also fabricates my work. He is like telling me how much we can spend and what money is left, and I said, well, why don't we just turn it into a cube? Then it'll do everything that we wanted to do. And he got really upset because we'd spent 6 months just doing the research and creating the pattern and everything. And he's like, but then he slowed down and started thinking it through. And he's like, that is friggin' brilliant. And so we ended up building the cube. It fit within our amount of money that we had. I was able to pay him. I was able to buy the materials. And I remember taking it for a competition to Grand Rapids. We took it in a little truck that we borrowed off a friend because we didn't really have money back then. Professors are really badly paid, by the way, just so you know. Anyway, and then when it came home after winning the competition, it was delivered by art handlers in an air-conditioned container. We can move on. Yeah. Yeah. I think I've covered most of it, so we can some of the, this is again an indoor piece, but it can be outside as well as inside. And this one is, this is not a refuge number 2. And on this, you can change it to the slide. So thank you. I'm open to questions if you have.
I can help. So we have to be out at about 12:15, but I think we have time for just a couple of questions. If anybody has them, I'll pass around the mic.
Sorry, I rambled a little.
No,
You didn't ramble. First of all, we were there last night and we absolutely love your work. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. And secondly, you answered a lot of my questions last night, but one that I forgot to ask was, I believe it was titled 100 Pieces. Just out of curiosity, are they in a certain order? Does the order mean something?
Are you talking about the rites of passage, the 100 pieces
Yes.
that were flat on the wall? They are, I kind of install that piece with the sense of balance that I have. So I will change it around a little bit. I will not follow a prescription. Sometimes I'll put things a different way. I've installed that piece usually together on a single wall, but sometimes I'll put it separate, like 50 here and 50 there. And it depends on the space, really. It's sort of like more site-specific. Most of my work can fit much of the spacing that I'm offered. I'm currently being asked to do something in Italy, which is very interesting because there are 4 columns in there. And so how that, and then the back wall has mirrors, and so it'll become kind of like Kusama's mirror rooms, the infinity rooms. So we'll see how that works out. But generally, the work can fit many dimensions.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Yeah, then mic up to you. Yeah.
I was just curious if you thought that your hero's journey would bring you back to show your artwork in Pakistan.
I have actually shown there. I was recently asked to exhibit there, but the politics of Pakistan can be so detrimental to people bringing in work from other places. Right now they are going through another upheaval. And so this lady who had asked me, she's an old friend from college actually, and she runs a really lovely gallery in Karachi. And so she asked me, and I kind of said, okay, can you pay for the shipping, because that's really heavy stuff that you want to show there. And she said, we'll have to wait because the politics and the economics are not so good right now. But I have exhibited earlier in my time there, not recently. Yeah. I would like to do it though. It would be great. Yeah.
Thank you for bringing your work here. It's just beautiful. I'm curious about the process, though, because these things are just so amazing. Can you describe how you actually design and then fabricate these large things?
So all of the steel pieces or the heavy light immersive pieces are I will convert the designs from photographs and fragments that I find interesting, and I'll combine them, make a collage on the computer. Then we'll get, if it's stainless steel that I want polished, I will use a water jet. I'll go to the industry, and seek some mill to cut it for us. If it's steel, regular steel, that's going to be lacquered later, then that goes to a laser machine, a large bed laser machine. And once it comes back, then we clean it, we polish it, we build the cube. Before it's painted, we take it apart, rebuild it to make sure that it'll fit back again. It goes to the painting, the lacquer place, comes back, then we build it again to make sure that it still fits, and then it's packed in a crate, and it comes apart. So it's sort of like, but the process is about, depending on how much work I have in production at any given time, I could get this finished, the larger cubes, in about 6 weeks, depending on if I get the time at a mill. And that first year after I won Art Prize, I think we made 11 cubes. So we were working nonstop, constantly, and I was traveling nonstop. And it's been like that for the last 10 years, and it's fabulous, and so grateful that people want to see stuff like this. With the drawings and the resin paintings that you saw that I didn't really talk about, I ran out of time because I ramble. But those, I'm very interested. I think my sensibility comes from this technique that was called pietra dura, and it was invented in Italy, where marble was carved and then inserted with tiles or colorful semi-precious stones. And then it was brought to India during the Mughal period, and a lot of monuments and castles and palaces were built on that technique. And they kind of, so the Mughal tradition, which is very historically relevant to India's history, we have some wonderful examples of that in Lahore, and I spent a lot of time there. And so a lot of my sensibility comes from that period because I'm very interested in the intricacy of cutouts. And in the beginning, I used to do everything by hand. I would cut things on paper myself. And now I have tendonitis and rotator cuff issues, so I have to use laser machines. I have a laser machine in my studio that I use for the drawings. So it's a lot of, and then of course I sew everything together. And I use wax often. I use printing techniques often on the work. So there's a lot of material. So that's why I call myself a multidisciplinary artist, because I can, I think I'm more interested in the content of the work rather than just how it looks.
Sure.
And I spend a lot of time thinking on how I can make it a composite, if that makes any sense. Thank you for the question, though.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hit my steps in this morning.
You just installed a piece of the roundabout here in SLO. I was just curious if you could tell us about that and just kind of what that is.
So it's called The Grays in Between. The title was when I was, again, that piece was also built during the previous presidency. And it was sort of like the idea of like the dominant culture being the octahedron on the top and the little pyramid underneath it was like the dominant culture and the immigrants, how do they influence each other? And so the idea was that we cast shadows on both. We cannot live without a social environment for humans. We need, people started in villages and then became bigger cities and towns. So the idea was that we are symbiotically attached to each other. And if you come from, say, Burma or South Korea or Pakistan or wherever, but you have decided to live in a place that is multicultural, then we influence each other. And so it was a way to address the grays in between, like the way people who may not belong entirely, but they are finding ways to belong. And that's my experience. And so that's why that project is titled The Grays in Between. And Emma and Leanne were so generous in getting the city to buy it from me, so I'm really grateful. And I hope that answers your question.
I think that's all the time we have. Feel free to hang around for a few minutes and talk to Anila directly, but thank you so much. Let's give